All right. Who can guess what we're going to be talking about today? Anyone see this movie? It wasn't very good. I understand that they took a lot of artistic liberties to make it more Hollywood friendly, but I wanted us to see that preview just so we could kind of get a sense of how big this project was, what this story might have been like for different people. Because I know when we hear the story about Noah, we picture kind of this giant boat, and we think of these children's Bibles, and it's very happy, right? You have these cartoons of these animals coming into this boat, and these rainbows, and it's bright and sunny, but really, if you think about what was going on, it's a very dark story, and the enormity of what had to be done, I think, is really hard for us to grasp. So we have been in a series in Genesis, and last week we talked about how God had given us everything we could ever need. He gave us, He put man in the garden, and in the garden was everything they needed for food, everything they could want. But more importantly, God gave man His presence. He gave man the ability to relate with Him so that we could see Him face to face as our Creator and the one that loves us the most. And God said, you can have everything in this garden, but there's just this one thing you need to trust me in. And when Adam and Eve, and really figuratively, we chose something other than God, right? God said that when you eat of this fruit, you shall surely die. Did they die? It says, the moment you eat of this fruit, you shall surely die. Eve ate the fruit, gave it to Adam. He ate the fruit. Did they die? They didn't. Because what we understand is God was not just talking about a physical death. God was talking about a spiritual death. Because at that moment, when man chose their own way, when man rebelled against God, when man said, God, I'm going to trust what makes sense to me rather than what your way is, we cut off that relationship because we broke trust. And sure, they eventually died physically, but immediately at that moment, what happened is they died spiritually. And then when we get to Noah, 10 generations had passed from Adam all the way to Noah. And even then, you see, man did not change their ways. We did not get any better. We did not decide to turn back to God. We did not realize that we made a big mistake. But instead, things actually got worse. And what we're doing today and next week is we're setting up kind of the background, the foundation for the long-term plan that God has. And we'll see that through Abraham. But look how bad it gets in Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 through 8. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Ouch. So what it's letting us know is it's not that people sinned from time to time. It's not that people mistakenly offended God, but the very core of their being was evil. The very core of who they were was a sinner. It wasn't just an event here and there, like you sin every now and then. It was a pattern. It was a lifestyle of sin. Look at verse 6. And the Lord regretted that He had made man on the earth. That word for regret is sometimes translated as God felt sorry, but it could actually mean to suffer grief or, in some sense, to repent. So think about the strength of the emotions God is feeling at this moment. He sees that man is just full of evil. His creation that He loved is full of evil. And one way you could look at this is God almost wanted to repent of creating man. And then it goes on and it says, and it grieved Him in His heart. Another way to translate that word grieved is pained. This is very intense if you think about it. Right? Out of all of creation, out of all the animals and the earth and the plants and the trees, only one creature is able to move the heart of God to grief. Think about how remarkable that is. That you and I, by the way we live and by the way we respond to God, God has given us the ability to grieve Him. Us, little old us, can affect the heart of God. the creator of the universe. And that is not possible unless God allows that to be the case. And that is not possible unless we realize that is how much God loves us. Because, I mean, it's often been said, and I would agree, that the ones that hurt you the most are the ones you love the most. Isn't that true? If a stranger offends me, that's fine. I may be upset for a day or two. I may hold a grudge for a little bit. It may kind of sting me a little bit. But when someone that you really love offends you and hurts you, you feel it, don't you? It's not just this emotional thing even. Even physically, you feel kind of this pain and this grief because you've been vulnerable to somebody and all of a sudden they've broken trust. And the indication here is God has such strong feelings, and it's saying that you and I have the ability to grieve the heart of God, or on the other side, to bless the heart of God. The day I got saved, the day that I really committed my life to God, right before going to church service, I got in a huge fight with my dad. Just stupid, silly, high school kid argument about driving or something. And I remember I got so mad that he wouldn't let me drive to church, and I yelled at him. And he yelled back. My dad never does that. And as I was thinking about it that night, I was like, why was he like that? I was so hurt that he didn't trust me. I was so hurt. And in an instant, God flipped my point of view around, and I saw it from my dad's point of view. And I felt for the first time, hey, as much as I was hurt, my actions hurt my dad. And until that moment, I never thought that I could affect my dad emotionally. Until that moment, I didn't understand that I had the ability to really cause grief and pain in my dad's heart. But I distinctly felt what it must have been like for a father to see his son acting the way I was acting, and the immense amount of grief that must have caused to my earthly father. And in a moment, God said, that's how I feel by the way you live your life. And I came to understand at that moment, oh my gosh, I have the ability to grieve God. The God who created all that we see, the God who is above all things, He allows me to affect His heart. Wow. And I began to understand God must love me that much because nothing else in creation has this ability. Verse 7, so the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. Verse 8, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So the entire earth, their very core was evil, but there was one guy that stood out from all this, and this guy named Noah. And so if you know the story, God tells Noah to build this ark, which is pretty much a rectangular boat. I know in kids' Bibles we see a nicely shaped boat that's able to stay fairly buoyant, good engineering design in these pictures. But if you look at the ark, it was very specifically a rectangle. And all it needed to do was float. You didn't need to steer it. It didn't need to have good aerodynamics. You didn't need to reduce the drag on the water. Okay, all it needed to do was float. And God was very specific with the ark, the same way He's later very specific with the tabernacle. And He tells Noah, you're going to build this vessel that floats, and then He gives him the reason in chapter 6, verse 17. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all the flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die, but I will establish my covenant with you. And you shall come into the ark, you and your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. So the reason Noah has to build this vessel is because God is going to send a flood. We'll see later that He's going to send the waters from under the ground to burst forth, and He's going to send rain for 40 days and 40 nights, and that's going to flood the land. So in other words, we don't like this word, but God is going to bring judgment. And a lot of churches stay away from this idea because we want to paint this picture of God being all loving and happy and just wanting the best for us. But we forget that, hey, God is holy, and we offended a holy God. And we spit in the face of a holy God when we choose our own way, when we don't trust Him, when we choose the life that makes the most sense to us. When we don't obey his commands, we offend a holy God, and a holy God cannot put up with that offense. So there's going to be judgment. I said last week, choices have consequences. Right? We've rejected God. But we have to understand, in the midst of all this, there's still mercy. Because God waited 10 generations. He said, I'm going to give you 10 generations, and let's see if anything changes. And nothing changed. Nothing changed. So it goes on. Chapter 7, verse 1 through 5. Then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens also, male and female, to keep their offspring alive in the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. So why was Noah so different than the entire generation that he was surrounded with? It's this last phrase. Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. That phrase occurs 4 times in this story. So to put it simply, what stood out to God was everyone else is doing their own thing. Everyone else has a heart of evil, but there's this guy Noah, and he is marked by obedience. Turn to your neighbor and say, obedience. Why does God give Noah such specific instructions? Why does he say, build it this long and this high? And there's all these details that we as people reading is like, who cares? We're not going to build this thing. Although Steve Carell did. We're not going to build this thing, but why does he give that detail? To point out that Noah was obedient to the very exact detail that God gave him. Noah was marked by obedience. And let me tell you something. You don't build an ark, even hearing from God, unless your life was already in a pattern of obedience. Do you know what I mean? It had to have been a lifestyle. Because if you read the story, it takes 50 to 70 years to build that ark. If you're not living in a lifestyle of obedience, you're not just going to turn it on and off like that. So we know, or we come to kind of understand that Noah has always lived in this lifestyle of obedience. Think about what this must have been like, right? The trailer gave you a little bit of an idea. For 50 to 70 years, you're building this thing that no one had ever seen. This thing that doesn't make any sense because it's not like it had ever rained or there was never been a flood up to this point. People are mocking you. People are saying, Noah, what are you doing? Why are you wasting your time building this vessel? And then you're going to trust God to bring all these animals, and you got to plan for food for all these animals for who knows how long. I mean, that takes obedience. Right? He faithfully followed God's instructions. God told him to get in. Right? So he builds this thing. God says, get in, and he does. And he's standing in there in a room full of smelly animals, probably making noises. Right? There's no lights like we have here. It's probably dark like the movie. Right? Who knows what is going on? God tells him to get in. He does. God tells him to build an ark. He does. But beyond obedience, what we see in this story is what marked Noah was not just obedience, there was trust. Turn to your neighbor and say, trust. He had to trust God every step of the way. We know that there was no way to close the door because there's no description of a pulley system of like a rope that'll close the door. So he gets into this ark, this huge vessel. There's this door that's still open. He has no way to close it, but he's in there. He had to trust God. And we see later that God shut the door. There was no way to steer the ark. Did you know that? There is no description of like, I guess in nautical words, a rudder. There was no way to steer the ark. That ark, when the flood waters came, could have ran into a mountain, could have crashed, could have broken apart because of what it ran into. There was no way to maneuver the ark out of his own strength and decision making. He had to trust God to guide this rectangular box to where it needed to go. So not just obedience, there was trust. What else marked Noah? He was obedient, he trusted, and lastly, he waited. Turn to your neighbor and say, he waited. Why are we so dead today? We try that again. 1, 2, 3. He waited. He waited. Think about this. God said, get into the ark, for I'm going to send rain in how long? 7 days. So picture this. You get into the ark. All right, I'm in the ark. There's all these animals. One day, nothing. Nothing. Not a drop. No water. Animals are making noise, eating food. Who knows what they're doing? Animal things. Okay? Second day, nothing. Third day, nothing. Nothing is going on. Fourth day, fifth day, you're like, okay, I'm in the ark with my family. We're taking care of these animals. Nothing. Sixth day, nothing. Seventh day. Finally, what is Noah doing for 7 days before God starts sending the rain? He's waiting. We're going to read all of chapter 8, or most of chapter 8, okay? So this is kind of a marathon read there. But hang in there. There is payoff in the end. It says this, but God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark, and God made a wind blow over the earth, and the water subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent forth a raven. And it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. And he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot. So she returned to him, to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark, and the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. He waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him any more. In the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Then God said to Noah, go out from the ark, you and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So it rains for 40 days, 40 nights, and the whole world is flooded. Now, what's interesting is the flood narrative is not unique to Jewish literature. You actually hear a lot about a flood narrative in Mesopotamian culture and in the famous book Gilgamesh, if anyone knows. So this idea of a flood is not just a Christian or Jewish idea. There's actually a lot of other cultures whose history, they've told this story. Okay, so for whatever reason, there is something ingrained in us that remembers there was some event that flooded the earth. Okay? There's also some debate about whether it meant the whole earth, or it could also be translated the land. So was it a local flood that just flooded the area, or was it the whole earth? I'm going to personally go with the whole earth, but there's debate either way, okay, just so you know. But I want you to understand what's happening, okay? So 40 days and 40 nights, it's raining. Noah waited. Then if you look at the verses, the wind blew the earth dry, so most scholars think it's like this hot wind for 150 days. What do you think Noah did? He waited. Then the ark sits on top of the mountains of Ararat, which is in modern-day Turkey, formerly the country of Armenia. And it just rests on this mountain, and he waited. 74 days later, he sees the tops of the mountain, so it's like there's hope. It's like, hey, for the first time I see land. What did Noah do? He waited. Then he waited an additional 40 days, and he sent out a raven that never came back. And then he sent out a dove 3 times at 7-day intervals. Okay, I mean, that's what doves do if you don't know, they come back, typically, if they're well trained. Okay, and throughout this whole time, all Noah did was waited. So the last time the dove doesn't come back, what does Noah do? He doesn't go, okay, the ground's dry, time to go. It says, if you actually count it, he waits another 57 days before leaving the ark. Isn't that remarkable? You're waiting 40 days, 40 nights. You're waiting 150 days for the earth to dry. You see the mountains. You would think, okay, it's finally happening. The dove doesn't come back. So you think, okay, the earth is dry. You actually see dry ground if you look at the verses. Noah sees dry ground. Does he leave? No. He waits another 57 days. And the only thing that actually caused Noah to leave the ark was he heard God's voice. He's sitting there. The evidence tells him it's okay to go. The evidence tells him the earth is dry. The evidence tells him the wise thing to do is to go and leave the ark because it's safe. That's what the evidence tells him. But he doesn't leave until he hears the voice of God say, go. He waited. Sometimes I've come to learn that the answer we're looking for, it really comes in the waiting. And that's difficult. Because sometimes, like Noah, we see, hey, the ground is dry. Shouldn't I do this? Hey, I see the mountains. Isn't the logical thing to assume is it's safe to move? And we want to rush the process, don't we? When you're in the season of waiting, we want to do it on our terms after a while. We want to make a decision that makes the most sense to us, a decision that looks like it's the wisest for our future, but Noah didn't do that. Even though the evidence said, hey, you can leave the ark, he waited until he heard the voice of God. And unfortunately, guys, I know for myself included, sometimes when we're in this period where it seems like God is doing nothing, we get so busy trying to manipulate the situation to work out for us that we miss his voice. Isn't that what we really need to hear? Isn't that the only thing that should really compel us to move? Not that we sit here paralyzed like, oh, I need to hear from God before I do anything. But the sense that if you're in a period of obedience and trusting and waiting, why don't we stay there until we hear God say, go? When it doesn't make sense, when it seems like it should be okay, Noah waited. But how many people do we know that God has put them in this place where they're waiting and they say, I need to take a break from God? You know what that really means? Honestly, that means I need to live out of obedience for a while because this waiting is just too difficult. How many times do we know that people try to rush things? Rush relationships, rush job opportunities, rush big lifetime decisions because they just can't wait and listen to the voice of God. Noah waited. But what is God telling us about himself? Or we see what set Noah apart, but what is God telling us about himself in this whole story of Noah? Where's the gospel? The whole point of the series is we want to understand that the story of God was embedded in Genesis. It wasn't this thing that got created or got revealed in the New Testament. No, the story of God was already there. So where's the gospel? The message of Noah is this. Man was so evil that for 10 generations, there was no way they were going to change their ways. And you know what? It took God to intervene. It took God showing up to show them, you need help. It took God to reveal the seriousness of their heart by destroying all of creation as a wake-up call to say, I'm not going to change, but God is going to come and he's going to show me I really need something. Think about Adam and Eve. When Adam and Eve ate of the fruit, they sewed fig leaves to cover themselves up, to cover their shame, right? They just sewed fig leaves like, oh, I'm naked. This is not good for whatever reason. Nakedness was fine before. All of a sudden, nakedness is not good. Okay? I think you would all agree. We have that mindset. So they sewed fig leaves. They were ashamed. But when God showed up, what did they do? They hid. Do you see what happened? Their shamefulness got magnified when God showed up. Because in contrast to this holy God, they now realize, oh my gosh, we've done a horrible, horrible thing. It's not that we've done a bad thing, we've done a horrible, horrible thing. We've offended God. And the story of Noah is, we as people will not change the core of who we are unless God intervenes and shows us, you need to change. You need to be fixed. Your problem is bigger than what you think it is. Our problem is that bad. You can change your behavior, but you cannot change your heart. And God is saying to a people, without me pointing it out, without me bringing judgment, you will not realize that it's not just about changing your behavior. You got to change your heart, because your behavior is an overflow of your heart. And at the core, you're sinful. Everyone looks really sad right now. You should. Because we go around not realizing that the only reason, if you know God, the only reason that you have had a change in heart is God showed you how evil you were at some point. And God pointed out, you need help. And that is not a bad place to be. I've said it before. If you ever feel guilty, that's good. It means God cares enough to make you feel something, to make you realize my relationship is not right with God. If you're ever numb after you sin, that's bad. So the fact that we feel anything, the fact that we have this desire to change, the fact that we feel frustrated about our spiritual life, that is good, because that is God's mercy showing us that we're still breathing and alive and wanting to fix things, or wanting Him to fix things. Or if we're numb, that's trouble, if we feel nothing. So God's going to bring judgment, but God is going to show, it takes God to show us how much we need salvation. But the story of Noah is also this. God is going to provide a means of rescue, but it has to be His way. And there is only one way. Are you with me? Only one way. Noah, you got to build this ark. This is the only way, my way, that you are going to come to be saved from this judgment. My way. It's not going to be your wisdom. It's not going to be your ingenuity. It's not because even you're a good person, Noah. No, you got to build this ark, this one way that I have created for you to be saved through this. It's not going to be enough for you to learn to swim. It's not going to be enough for you to climb the highest mountain to escape the flood. You cannot escape this flood except for the one way that I created and the one way that I set up. And that one way, guess what, is going to look foolish to everybody else, isn't it? Look at that idiot building this boat. What is this pointing us to? The cross. How is the cross described in Corinthians that we studied? It's foolishness. The cross looks foolish. Like, are you kidding me? That's the one way to get saved? That's God's one way to get saved? Yes. Not any other religion. That's going to offend people. Good. Not any philosophy. Not because you're a good human being. You're not a good human being at the core. You're not. Even Noah. Right? He was good and that got him noticed. He was obedient and that got him noticed. But listen, to be saved, he had to commit to live under the single provision that God set aside to save him. And he had to stay under that provision. He had to live his life obedient to living in the ark. Like we as Christians are called to live life obedient to living under the grace of the cross. Noah never once are like, well, I mean, this is great that I'm safe. Let me venture out. Let me check out the wildlife out there. Let me go whale watching. Let me go scuba diving. He never did that. Right? For the whole time that judgment was coming, he stayed under the one way God provided protection. Are you there? So what is the story of Noah? The story of Noah is here we have this guy who's obedient, he's trusting, he's willing to wait, but we have a God who's going to bring judgment. And that God needs to bring judgment to show us how evil we really are at the core. But that God who brings judgment is going to provide one way out to save us from that judgment. It gets good, though. I mean, that's good already. Amen by myself, but it gets good. Watch. Genesis chapter 8, verse 20 through 22. Then Noah, so this is after the flood, Noah walks out after hearing God's voice. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Okay, this side note, that's pretty risky, right? I mean, these are the only animals left, okay? And you're like, oh, well, let's sacrifice them onto God. You know, it's like, oh, okay, are you sure about that? Okay, that's pretty risky. But anyway. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So there's this term that's repeated, never again. Never again will I do this. What is that telling us about God? God is not going to give up on his creation. God is committed to his creation because never again will he destroy it. So another way to phrase this, anyone here play poker? Nobody. God, if you don't know this phrase, is all in. If you don't know what that means I got such a good hand that I'm going to put I am all in. There's no turning back. So when God says, I am never going to destroy the world again, this is never going to happen, what he's saying is, I am fully committed to my creation. And he is fully committed to us. And he will not give up on his creation, so he will not give up on us. He's all in. And you know what's amazing? Look at this. Oh, gosh. I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil. See? He's saying it's not going to get any better, guys. I know. God knows. It's not going to get any better. It's not like all of a sudden everyone's going to be like, oh, there was a flood. I better change my ways. Because we can't change on our own, remember? It's not going to get any better. But in the midst of that, God says, I'm committed to my creation. I'm committed to you. I am not going to give up on you. No matter how far you're falling, no matter how much things get worse in your life, no matter how much you rebel, no matter how much you spit in my face, I will not give up on you. I am all in. But the question is, are you all in? Right? So the story of Noah, I mean, we paint such a nice picture of it for our kids, but the story of Noah is really judgment. But in the midst of that judgment, there's this loving, merciful God that commits to us fallen, weak, frail, pathetic people and provides one way that we can have protection from the judgment we deserve. Isn't that amazing? Can we close our eyes? Okay, this week, no moody music, okay? Getting too charismatic at the pro. I'm just kidding. No moody music. But could we just remember that we didn't come to God because we were wise. We didn't come to God because we were good. We came to God because God first showed us we need to reconnect with our Creator. And for some of us in this room that feel like God can't love me, God's given up on me, God says, no, I'm not giving up on your on you, on my creation. I'm committed to seeing this relationship through and seeing this plan through. Some of you need to hear that, because some of you feel like you've messed up so much. How can God still love you? Right? The very fact that you can grieve God's heart should tell you how much he loves you. So in whatever way God spoke to you, just take a couple minutes and just reflect and pray, and then I'll close this.